Welcome back into Bill's Chat Live. We are live every Friday night at 8 p.m. I am Josh McCarty. With me, as always, is Luka. Luka, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. It was a nice, relaxing Friday, surprisingly. The sun was out here in Western New York. Work was actually pretty smooth, things like that. Um, to me, it was a good way to kind of finish the.
I'm doing good.
Ooh,
Chat.
sorry about that. Doing good, everything like that. Basically, it was a really good way to finish off a tough week when it comes to fandom and sports and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And roll into this weekend now where we can have this preview talk and everything like that and just look forward rather than think about what's happened behind.
I think that's the key to this entire week, right? I was thinking about this on Monday, and we are not going to spend time reflecting on the Jets. I think as a fan base, as a collective Bills Mafia, we need to just move on from that game. It was one game, but spinning it forward into this Raiders game, Luca, this is a short week. And it snuck up on me because by Wednesday, I was still kind of like playing the what if game. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, Sean McDermott speaks today on the Raiders and the Bills practice for the first time. Do you think the fact that this is a short week, which is normally viewed as a negative for teams, actually works in the Bills' favor this week?
Yes. Yes, I do. I am a firm believer in situations when it comes to if you have a heartbreaking loss, if you have something that happens, and I believe this in all sports, by the way. This is not just something that I believe in when it comes to the NFL or anything. In the NHL, any sport in general, competitors, if you have a heartbreaking loss, you want to do something as best you can to get to the next game. You want to get to the next competition. You want to do something else to clear that memory of what had recently transpired. And the best thing for the Bills was that it's a short week, we'll call it. I mean, they would never go Monday into Thursday. That would obviously be the only better option if you're trying to shorten your week. They would never do that, of course. But overall, get to the next game and move on forward. And on top of that, you don't have a difficult game as well. You kind of have a game that you'd find a little bit more optimal, we'll call it. It's any given Sunday. I'm not saying the Raiders are absolute crap because they're not absolute garbage, but it's like it's better than playing the Chiefs. It's better than playing the Bengals. It's better than playing one of those premier teams after dealing with what you dealt with at that time.
I'm with you. And, there are paths where this Raiders game could get tricky, but the Bills have been consistently this week 8.5, 9.5 point favorite. The books clearly like the Bills. The Raiders, I mean, normally they'd be traveling west to east, but they actually practiced all week in West Virginia, which was kind of odd. I didn't quite understand that logic there. But they have some studs. They have some high-end talent. Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs are in the conversation for two of the best players in the league at their position. And I also would throw Max Crosby in that conversation as one of the better edge rushers in the league. And where I want to start tonight, Luca, is on this Raiders offense because I think when we're projecting how this game is going to go, the first thing many of us are thinking about is, okay, the Bills offense had a really bad night on Monday night. And maybe specifically that was Josh Allen who had a bad night. But I do think there are some things about this Raiders offense that can complicate things for the Bills. One thing I will tell you is their offensive line was not ranked highly by PFF. They were in the 20s preseason. They pretty much ran it back with the same group that was fairly average last year. And their one veteran addition was, wait for it, Bills fans, Greg Van Roten. And he is their starting right guard. So that should give you an idea of what kind of shape they're in. But in week one, they held up fantastic on the road against Denver, only gave up 4 pressures. Jimmy G didn't get sacked once, had nearly 3 seconds from snap to throw. So, Luca, my first question to you is in the little bit we saw of the Bills against Aaron Rodgers, which was a very little bit, it sure looked like they had some pressure schemes cooked up for him. Leonard Floyd absolutely popped. But once Zach Wilson came in, it really became a running game, and it was really hard to judge the defensive line as pass rushers. I mean, Zach Wilson had 19 yards at halftime. But in general, when you look at the fact that Greg Van Roten is starting, when you look at the fact that their left tackle, Colton Miller, very, very good, solid left tackle. He's one of the better left tackles in the league. But at right tackle, Jermaine Illuminor, kind of a average run of the mill right tackle. And then their left guard is a second year player. He's not necessarily great yet. I think there's a lot of people that thought he would be somebody that would be great, but third round pick. And then their center is also an average player. Is this a matchup that, one, you expect the Bills defensive line to dominate, and two, do you think they should?
How I feel about this is somewhat extremely similar to how I felt about the Jets offensive line. And I thought that even though it was a heartbreaking loss and everything like that, I feel as if kind of what we saw is what I expected. I mean, I called out Leonard Floyd being kind of a look. I didn't expect to be exactly what had happened with Leonard Floyd and Aaron Rodgers and all that, but he was a force early on that edge. I thought Rousseau, of course, who was rated by PFF, take that how you want, as our best edge rusher by far. He looked exceptional as well. It's a matchup the Bills absolutely have to capitalize on and should be able to, and I expect will capitalize on it. It's just the offensive line for the Raiders is just something to be had. It's something to get at, and the Bills have plenty of individuals, weapons, whatever you want to call them, obviously on the D line to just go get at it, whether it's in the run game or passing game, and especially on top of it. When it comes to the passing game, Jimmy G's not a kind of guy that's going to improvise on the fly if covered or if the pocket's breaking down on him. I mean, it's just there are a lot of good things that come out of this matchup, a lot of things that you should like out of this, that inside or outside, there's a lot that you should love about the Bills defensive line matchup against kind of this subpar at best offensive line for the Raiders.
I agree. And I echo what Roy Collins is saying. To me, this is the interior of the defensive line really has a chance to eat. If you're starting Greg Van Roten, you can't have a lot of good options. This would be a fantastic spot for a good Ed Oliver game, who I thought played really well on Monday night. He had that one big tackle for loss on the Jets' last drive, which enabled the Bills to get the ball back and ultimately go down and tie the game up with the field goal from Tyler Bass. Ed Oliver playing well consistently this year would certainly be a sight for sore eyes for those of us who do question their ability to do that. One last defensive topic I want to talk to you about, Luka, before we really spin it around on offense, because that's where I think the meat and potatoes of this game is. Christian Benford. Christian Benford, when I went back and watched the game film, was outstanding. And that's not hyperbole. That's not me being a fanboy. That's watching every play, thinking, what should he be doing on this play? What did he do on this play? And it checked every single box. Luka, I sent you a DM this week after I got done watching it. And I said, my hot take is by season's end, it's not going to be a question as if Christian, it's not going to be a question if Christian Benford is one of the top two Bills starting cornerbacks. I think the question is going to be oh my gosh,
Woo.
is Christian Benford the best cornerback on the team? And I'm ready to sit here right now and say that I'm going to have a hard time saying no if he keeps stacking games like that.
Christian,
and
whatever
Christian
you
were
want to
just a
call
hard
them.
mix there, man.
I loved it. You slid in my DMs
Yeah.
as you even referenced there too. A lot of things I could have done while you were talking about that, Josh. I
Yeah.
just respectfully was trying to be professional about it.
Why would we do that?
Yeah. So with Christian Benford, I loved when you kind of came at me in the DMs and you're like, are we really about to get into that potential? Is this what I'm really thinking? Does this seem crazy? I felt like was almost in a weird way what you were saying. And immediately my response to you, and I will double down here, was I'm already basically there. I'm already in the world where everything I keep seeing out of this guy is he's the ultimate safety blanket when it comes to over top. And then his actual instinct play is right there for a vet that is just like you have to remind yourself where you drafted this guy. You have to remind yourself how we ended up on your roster to realize just how special or how unique that really feels like and what it is. And overall, man, by season's end, I'm with you. I think everyone else will most likely be in a similar boat where we are talking about him in that way. Hopefully he doesn't have something like last year where it was a significant injury that keeps him out for an extended period of time of any sorts. He can keep progressing, keep moving forward and everything like that, and eventually just develop more and more into this guy where you're no longer looking at Trey White as the clear number one. You're looking at Trey White as that kind of veteran, really nice kind of, I don't want to call him a luxury because I think, but it's kind of that way where it's like, it's your luxury number two. Christian Benford almost becomes your more dependable corner with a higher ceiling at this point in time. And it's a great place to be, especially all things considered with that draft, with the corner position on this roster and everything. I mean, it's no surprise. I love Christian Benford. I will fanboy over him. It was funny. Everyone highlights, of course, the biggest highlight of Christian Benford was basically saving 4 points by running down Breece Hall. I will say this, even me, there's a big asterisk there. If that is 100% Breece Hall, I don't think Christian Benford is actually catching him, But luckily for Benford, luckily for us, and luckily for everything, and he still didn't quit on the play, especially considering where he came from on that play. He easily could have understood if he kind of pulled up a little bit halfway down the field. He didn't. He made the play, made things happen. Brees Hall was not at 100%. He just basically died 50 yards after the run. I can't believe we let him get to the 50-yard plus point at that point. But overall, Christian Benford still hunted him down. Everything in coverage, he hunted down really well. He locked his side up extremely well. He is just a highlight and a gem to this defense that it's unbelievable to believe that you got him at the tail end of day 3 in a draft just a year ago.
And when you look at the age of some of the studs in the Bills secondary, the guys that have been studs over the Sean McDermott era, you have Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, both over 30, Tre'Davious White inching up on 30, along with Taron Johnson. You're going to need this next wave of defensive backs to come in. And if Christian Benford can go from being, okay, I feel like he's okay as a starter, to being a very plus starter, a guy that is a really good cornerback in this league, that is great for the short term and the long term. But the Bills still do need something out of Kaiir Elam. I tweeted out that there is one concern about this Raiders offense that has me thinking that this game could be a little dangerous, and it has to do with matchups and specifically personnel. One thing the Raiders do a lot more than most teams in this league, Luka, is they run a lot of 21 personnel, which is 2 running backs, 1 tight end. It's more of a heavy traditional front, and they will continue to run the ball. They have no problem being a run-first team. They're one of the few teams in the league that don't mind doing that, and Josh McDaniel comes from the Belichick school of, if it's working, we're not going to stop. And what we saw last week was, even when the Jets went 13 personnel, which is 1 wide receiver, 3 tight ends, that is a ultra heavy formation. That was when they were back on the 3-yard line. The Bills stayed in nickel. Now, it wasn't their base nickel. They took out Taron Johnson. They brought in Taylor Rapp. Taylor Rapp did not have a good game, but I think when you look at the fact that their linebackers, if you're going to count the nickelback as a linebacker in that situation, are undersized Matt Milano, very undersized Terrell Bernard, and then a safety in Taylor Rapp, I think teams, especially teams like the Raiders, are going to force the Bills to prove that you can stop the run in that set.
And that's what you should be doing with the team that's constructed in a way that the Raiders are offensively. I mean, let's be honest. It's not like they're forced to do it due to injuries, due to anything. That is by design. They have built this roster. They have a guy under center in Jimmy G and everything around him that just is suited for that style play. And yeah, that is definitely something to note. And that's kind of the path to success for the Raiders, is you have to make this an ugly game. You have to impose your will the way you want to offensively with the individuals you have, in order to slow the game down, in order to kind of actually, I shouldn't say slow it down, quicken it up, essentially run the clock, just make it a short game. And then overall, you're doing that on the ground, where by the time you get to the late third, early fourth quarter, those 2-3 yard runs, of course, as you hear all these years, turn into those 5, 6, 7 or home run shots. And you all of a sudden find yourself up because you've just pounded the rock 25, 30, 40 times, whatever it might be. It's something where I would expect a healthy Bills defense to be able to manage. And then you just have to worry about one target in the air overall with Devontae Adams. But yeah, everything you brought up was spot on. That it's what they want to do. It's what McDaniels has been building this to do. So you would expect them to be successful. But I will say this: everything they did in Denver last week, it didn't make me feel overwhelmed by this offense on the ground. Denver was able to manage them very, very well. Yes, the Raiders came out with a win, but really, if you think about it, it was a tie game. It was a tie game. Will Lutz missed an extra point. That's the only reason it got to the situation it was. So they just want to control the ball as much as they can, because they really do understand they're kind of outmatched talent-wise by a lot of other teams around the league.
Yeah, they are. That game was really kind of a pillow fight. Roy Collins asked a question about Kaiir Elam. We should probably address this now, because I do think, Luka, there's been a little bit of a faulty narrative about Kaiir Elam out there this week because he was inactive. Does that signal he's a bust? And I just want to clear up a misconception about Kaiir. I know I fidget with my hat a lot. I'm always worried about the shadow on my face. The misconception is, because he was inactive, he's a bust. That is just not true. Is his career going in the direction we hope? No, we certainly hoped he would rank higher than the 4th boundary corner going into his 2nd year as a player the Bills trade up in the 1st round to get. But when you talk about a guy who is the 4th boundary corner on your depth chart, that is a position that is going to be inactive on game day unless you bring other qualities to the situation. Kyer Elam is not really a nickel cornerback. He's not somebody that can play safety, and he's not a core special teamer. That is why guys like Saran Neal and Cam Lewis get activated over him, because those guys can get you out of a game at cornerback if you need it. If you get multiple injuries at that position, that's the only way you will really feel the loss of Kyer Elam on that specific Sunday. Whereas there's going to be special teams plays, they can get you out of a game. Cam Lewis specifically can also back up at safety, and he is your best nickel corner depth player. Now, I understand the concern people have is I get all of that. And one more thing about that, to prove that, the Bills only dressed 3 outside cornerbacks in every single game last year except one. The one game they dressed 4 was Thanksgiving. And if you remember Thanksgiving, that was Tre'Davious White's first game back. He was on a very limited snap count. He was out after, I think, 1 drive, maybe 2, and then he sat on the sideline. So that was a very special circumstance. Otherwise, it was only 3 boundary cornerbacks. The 4th one was always inactive. So the fact that Elam was inactive last week is not a surprise and should not signal anything about his career trajectory. If you want to focus on the fact that he's the 4th cornerback, we can have that conversation. And the path to him becoming active, Luka, is really skipping ahead of Dane Jackson on the depth chart, being that 3rd cornerback. And I think that's where the conversation really kicks off with Kyer Elam. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on here. I'll allow you to kind of chime in where you want. I just wanted to make sure that was cleared up, because I think there was a big misunderstanding this week about, oh my God, he's inactive. That means that they're giving up on him.
Exactly. I don't even want to spend too much time, because I think you just did such a great job, Josh. Proud of you for that little, soapbox moment there about Kyer Elam and his position on the team. Overall, being active on game day and being on the 53-man roster are 2 completely different things if you really think about it. Being active on game day doesn't necessarily mean that you're always above individuals in your same position group, like a Cam Lewis or whatever it is, because Cam Lewis on game day offers you a hell of a lot more than, say, Kyer Elam. If you put them, head to head on who would you rather take, or who would the other teams around the league take in order to fill out their cornerback depth chart, I'm pretty sure a vast majority would take Kyer Elam over a Cam Lewis. And again, that's not even necessarily against Cam Lewis either. Cam Lewis's job is not to be a, high-end piece at the cornerback position on a roster. His value, his job is to be exactly what he is, be kind of that Swiss Army knife on game days to get you out of a lot of different things if you need, and still provide you great special teams play. You've beaten the drum time and time again. Kyer Elam does not provide you that. So it just lessens his value on game days themselves. So he just needs to get above a Dane Jackson in order to be active, or there just needs to be a game in which they might be playing a lot of dime coverage or just go really DB heavy, that they still need that extra corner, that, true cornerback in the lineup in order to facilitate an injury and or play them, because they're trying to do that in the secondary. So it's just, Kyer Elam's more of a guy where he's still figuring things out or whatever it might be. But again, I don't want to call this a luxury thing, because it's just a different situation, but that's really what he has become. He's a luxury item where you could still have a very high potential corner in the future out of him. But when it comes to right now on game days, he is not a necessity for this roster. And your Cam Lewis's and Saran Neals and stuff, those guys are more valuable to you week in, week out on game day, when you have to have that active roster ready to go.
Yeah, and I think to answer Roy's question, I think Kyer Elam will be here next year. It's important to remember he's only going into the 2nd year of his rookie deal, which means no matter what happens this year, after this season, you still have 2 years of cost control, and you have the 5th year option sitting in your pocket if you want to use it for that 3rd year. So there are a lot of reasons to keep Kyer Elam in house. He does have skills you cannot teach for the position: athleticism, speed, length. But it seems like it's just been a tougher transition to this Bills defense. I'm not ready to give up on him. It doesn't sound like the Bills are ready to give up on him unless they get a team that's ready to pay you a decent pick for him, 2nd, 3rd, maybe a couple of 4ths. I would not boogie bash him and just take whatever I can to get him out of the building. I think his skill set still can translate to the NFL, and the Bills will see what they can get out of him. Luka, on Jimmy Garoppolo, never thought this was an upgrade for the Raiders at quarterback. But I will say that there are some people out there that think Derek Carr looks shot. And what I will say about Jimmy Garoppolo is he's a much different quarterback than Derek Carr. He is a very intermediate and short game quarterback. He only threw 3 passes last week of 20 plus air yards. Everything was short and in the middle. And I think when you look at what the Bills need to do defensively, one, I think it starts with Josh Jacobs. But two, when you look at the weapons without Jacoby Myers, who is in concussion protocol, I think it resembles last week's opponent, Luka, where there's one outstanding weapon in Devontae Adams and then a bunch of guys. Now, Hunter Renfrow at times has been more than just a guy, but at this point in his career, it doesn't feel like he's much more than just an average slot receiver based on what the Raiders are doing with him. Austin Hooper is the definition of just a guy at tight end. Your guy, Michael Mayer, is not really in the good graces of Josh McDaniel yet because he wants him to become a better blocker. So he's not really getting on the field too much at this point in time. So I really feel like it comes down to Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, and then obviously stopping Josh Jacobs. And knowing that they're not going to take their shots, that they're not going to go deep, that's not what they're going to major in. I would expect the Bills to bring the safeties up. I would expect Hyde or Poyer to live in the box this game and really stress the underneath and have Jimmy Garoppolo prove that he can beat you deep. Obviously, with more than 2 eyes on Devontae Adams. Do you see it differently?
I don't see it entirely differently. What I will say is, I love the idea in theory. And the only reason I say that is because when I saw Hyde and more specifically Poyer playing very high in the box, especially on, post snap, you recognize run, their angles, and it just, maybe it's rust. Maybe their instincts aren't quite there yet, but boy, Poyer was rough. When he was collapsing into the box, he was rough last week. And that's why those big runs popped. I mean, it was quite literally him and Dodson combined that were just taking horrible run gap assignment, horrible angles. And it just was allowing just these free lanes into the secondary where you had your Hydes or, Benford, as we talked about, just trying to recover and make things happen. And it's just maybe if McDermott saw that week 1, because it does feel like it might be somewhat of a similar circumstance, maybe you don't see those safeties collapsing as high and you just put more weight on your linebackers to be true to their run fits, understand their lane, stay in your lane, do not abandon your lane whatsoever. Because even more so, I will say this, I would say I do worry about the passing game of the Raiders more than I do the Jets with Zach Wilson. Obviously not with Aaron Rodgers, but with Zach Wilson. Jimmy G, to me, is one of those guys that I'm not overly impressed by him physically or his talent, but he is a coach's darling. He is an offensive coordinator's darling because he will do exactly what you tell him to do at all times. He will never improvise. He will never go off script. He doesn't want to do anything else. The only problem he had early on in his career is he just wouldn't go out of bounds soon enough. And unfortunately, he tore an ACL or two and had some injuries that kind of made his situation in San Fran not the greatest when he was at his height in San Fran where he couldn't stay healthy. But outside of that, he always does what you want. There's a reason Kyle Shanahan and also now Josh McDaniels wants him at the helm rather than a Derek Carr or whoever, because you just kind of want that guy who trusts you as a play caller that what you're doing is putting them in the best situation at that point in time. And then you will just do the job that they are asking you to do. So with that all in mind, I don't know if I necessarily see the safeties coming up as high. I think you could see, more of just the traditional defense that we saw last year this go around. I don't know if you'll see exotic blitzes and stuff. Maybe they do kind of go with more interior blitzes to cover those interior gaps so that your edges can just be worried about keeping their edge. And then you're just basically blocking it up the middle to kind of hopefully fill the holes that are the run fits. But overall, I don't necessarily myself see the safeties pinching up just due to what we saw last week. And then that passing game can get you over top. Jimmy G has been known to hit you over top in the play action very, very well. He can get the ball deep technically. And if your safeties are caught up short, in the box, essentially, Devontae Adams is one of the best, if not the best in the league, stuff like that. And Jimmy G doesn't have to laser it in at all on a one-on-one matchup against a Trey White or whatever. He just needs to put it over top and put it in the right spot. And he's absolutely capable of doing so. So I don't know if I necessarily see it the same way. I just understand what you're saying and I won't disagree with that. It's just, there's a couple variables that I'm kind of not as sold on that idea as you are.
I think the Bills are going to have to prove they can stop the run without overcommitting to it, because what you just mentioned there about play action, if the Bills are having to bring down Heidenpoyer on a regular basis to win the numbers game to stop the run, that just plays right into what the Raiders want to do with play action and plays to the strengths of Jimmy Garoppolo. Let's flip it around and talk about the Bills offense. That has been a pain point for many this week. And before we get to Josh Allen, another guy that's kind of come under fire for his performance in the Jets game is wide receiver Gabe Davis. He only had 2 catches for 32 yards. And, that's kind of been the bugaboo with Davis is he disappears, and then he has a game where he goes for almost 200 yards. And he disappears, and then he has a game where he goes for $120. And then by the end of the year, it's like, hey, Gabe Davis had 850 yards and 6 touchdowns. But it's such a roller coaster of consistency that's why a lot of people are apprehensive to rely on him as a number 2 wide receiver. I think this is a fascinating matchup for Gabe Davis for multiple reasons, Luka. One, just narrowing it down to the cornerbacks that are going to be starting for the Raiders, it's not good. You have Marcus Peters, who is 30 years old, and you have a 4th-round rookie in Jacorian Bennett. Those are the 2 boundary corners, and Davis plays almost exclusively outside. So either way, he should have a favorable matchup. But we know the story on Davis. He is a high ADOT receiver. He gets downfield. It only takes 1 completion to him, and he might get 50 yards on that 1 completion. When you look at the Raiders from last season, Luka, I have this number here, they were the 7th lowest defensive ADOT in the league. And they only gave up a defensive ADOT of 7.1 yards per play. And what that means is they focus on taking away the big play and force you to play underneath. That's by scheme. So Gabe Davis is a guy that, for as much as we've all liked him, has not proven he can run the full route tree and win at the intermediate levels. This is a perfect game for Gabe Davis to prove that he has taken that next step, not just be that one-trick pony, win at all levels of the field, and really prove himself to be that wide receiver 2 that so many of us have hope for him to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the ADOT stat you brought up is kind of we know we have a bad off or defense. The Raiders recognize their defensive personnel is less than ideal. And then you have an individual like Chandler Jones, who's a big part of it, just holding out because he's not happy with things. So it's just even lesser. So it's Max Crosby kind of doing his own thing. You have a 1st-round draft pick on the opposite edge, but I mean, it's a 1st-round kind of rough around the edges edge project that you have there. You didn't want him to be depended on as a starter opposite Crosby, but you find yourself where you are. So what they do is they just basically overcompensate and just sit so high over top. Honestly, my biggest path to the Raiders making a game of it beyond just what they can do offensively when it comes to the defensive side of the ball is quite literally just tempting Allen so hard to go above them. And they could, on 2nd and 3s, I could easily see a life where they have their corner 7 yards off the line of scrimmage. I could see a life where their safeties are 20, 25 yards off the line of scrimmage because they still do not want to give up that opportunity over top. And they will happily hand you this, 2nd and 3, 3rd and 2, whatever it is. They'll be like, hey, as long as you fight for those 3 yards instead of taking us for 50 over top, because we know you absolutely could if we're pressing you at all or anything like that. Yeah, absolutely. So everyone naturally goes to, okay, underneath, you got Dalton Kincaid, you got Diggs in the slot, whatever it is, kind of a similar situation to like the Jets, but it's more of they were actually really good at defense. In this case, you're still going to have those guys, but you need a guy like Gabe Davis, who is only really proven to be an over the top kind of individual and stuff like that, just naturally in your head. And his drops more come on those intermediate or even short throws, just kind of the timing throws and stuff like that. This is that occasion that if Allen, for whatever reason, can't look at Diggs, can't look at Kincaid, can't look at whoever else is on the opposite side, you have your Gabe Davis outlet to the opposite side there on a quick slant, on a 5-yard in, whatever it might be, on a curl. Whatever the situation might be, he needs to be able to figure out that timing route and be depended on as a reliable pass catcher. And this is definitely a game where he should be able to do that because, as you mentioned, the individuals across from him are not the greatest no matter what. I will say Marcus Peters, yes, he's older, but he's still kind of a decent matchup for a Gabe Davis. Like if you're a Raiders fan, I wouldn't mind a Marcus Peters on a Gabe Davis because it's kind of one of those things where Marcus Peters on his day could be a very frustrating corner for a guy like Gabe Davis, who's not sure in the hands, or at least from the outside in. I think Gabe Davis himself thinks he's very sure in the hands, as you should as an NFL wide receiver. But I'm just saying from the outside, it's like he's not a Stephon Diggs. He's not a Larry Fitzgerald to do a callback that I have to do here because Fitz. So
Is he
overall,
dead?
no, I
What are
just
we
had to give
doing?
him, I had to give him my props. I
Okay.
always give him my props. So overall, it's just like Gabe Davis can shine. Everyone should shine. I
Mhm.
don't care who it is.
Yeah.
I don't care. You should absolutely be able to win your matchups underneath, and you should absolutely be a dependable pass catcher against this defense. That is my point. So, yes, this is one Gabe Davis can, but it can be Hardy. It can be Knox. It can be Kincaid. It absolutely will be Diggs because Diggs
Mhm.
is always Diggs. And you just move on with your day. I also expect James Cook in the passing game because their linebackers and safeties are not exactly impressive either. That is an individual that I highlight as being a nice outlet, especially with what he showed already against the Jets. He is a nice weapon in a matchup like this.
Yeah, I think all those guys will be involved. And what I want to talk about next, though, one thing on Marcus Peters, he might be the perfect quarterback or perfect cornerback to catch Josh Allen on a day if Josh Allen's being over aggressive, because we know the story on Marcus Peters. Is he the best cornerback in the league? No, but he's always got his mind on taking the ball away. A lot of times that comes at the expense of biting on a double move. He is constantly watching the quarterback, trying to take the ball away. And if Josh Allen falls into the bad habits of being overly aggressive, Marcus Peters is certainly a guy that if you give him a chance to make a play, can certainly do that. I want to talk about Izzy's comment here because he says he thinks Cook goes for 100 plus on the ground. I think this has a chance to be a very big James Cook day. One, because you mentioned it, their linebackers are not great. I think that unlike the Jets, who I will just admit are one of the best tackling defenses I have seen in a long time, and it seemed like whatever defender got there first got the Bills to the ground, not just Cook, but you saw it with Hardy, you saw it with Kincaid. There was just not a lot of broken tackles out there. I think with Cook, there is going to be some room to go here. And I also wonder if Ken Dorsey's answer, Carl Tommen with the super chat, should Josh be under center more or still shotgun? I love that question, Carl. I'm going to come right back to it after this point on James Cook. I will come right back to it. Luke, if I forget, remind me. Um, on James Cook, I wonder if Ken Dorsey is going to make a concentrated effort to run the ball more as kind of an automatic way of keeping Josh Allen under reins and under control. And then I started looking up because right now it's week 1. There's only so much you can take from a small sample size. So I went back to 2022 and I looked at fantasy points against for the Raiders. And like what could that tell me as far as like what positions could pop against them? So they were the 11th worst against tight ends last year. So what does that mean? It means like they were below average against tight ends, but they played 2 games against Travis Kelce. So what does that really tell me? Not much. Had an unfair advantage. As far as wide receivers go, they were middle of the pack. Middle of the pack, there's nothing that stands out. The Raiders were the 7th worst running back defense in the league. Running backs went off against them consistently. Ergo, I think James Cook has a chance. I don't know if it's going to be 100 yards on the ground, but I absolutely think 120, 130 total yards for James Cook is in play, Luka.
Yeah, all purpose yards for James Cook. 100 should be a line he absolutely can get against this Raiders defense. That doesn't surprise me at all that last year they gave up that much. They bring in a guy like Marcus Epps from Philadelphia. Like he's okay at safety and stuff like that, but when you look at that, Trayvon Morig, sorry, there's no N in there. A Divine Diablo, I believe is his name. Like these individuals that play in the spine of their defense are not overly impressive and seem like individuals that a James Cook matchup on them should absolutely take advantage of. I like the idea of what you're saying when it comes to James Cook and Dorsey running the ball a lot more. And I don't think that it's necessarily out of the realm of possible when it comes to happening. What I will say is this. Historically with Josh Allen coming off of heartbreaking losses, if you look at it, he hasn't started off those next games hot as well. Like, so, and if you also look at it, I looked at a couple, it's really hard to get these detailed information things. You got to really dig deep in order to do it. The few games I looked into and I was able to get drive logs and stuff of that nature before I just ran out of time, unfortunately, before we were live, was essentially there was that conceded effort to run the ball early. And it's the classic mindset. And I think it's a really old school mindset to do so. You want to keep the ball out of his hand early, get him comfortable in the game and stuff like that. there's something in me that tells me that you should almost as if do things that are high percentage plays, but actually depend on Josh Allen more to get him back in the rhythm, do things that should be had. And this is a matchup that you absolutely could do that. And James Cook could be a key part of that in when it comes to just playing the swing passes out wide and stuff and let the athlete be an athlete and just gain yards that way. So he's getting comfortable through the air with those short passes on his own before he needs to start hitting those tight windows later on in the game. With confidence, he will do that. So it's an interesting point to make. It's something that I think, the traditionalist mindset would have, but I would love to actually see it in a different way where they do get James Cook and a Kincaid involved and things like that, where you're probably using high percentage plays to get it going, but you're doing it with, run through the air kind of situation where you're bringing offensive line play out wide. You're doing things that get Cook the ball not be in between the tackles, but necessarily outside of the tackles, at the numbers area, stuff like that. I would like to see that because that could hopefully boost Josh Allen's confidence. That in mind, I'm not necessarily overly worried about Allen's confidence. I think he will come in and he will be fine. But James Cook should have a big day. The offense should have a big day. Everyone should be able to eat against this defense because down the spine, out wide, and stuff like that, outside of Max Crosby, there is not a single name on here that you should be even remotely worried about. Marcus Peters is a notable guy, and Max Crosby is a game record. Outside of that, there is nothing to be had, and we have the talent, we have the athletes everywhere across the board to be able to, hold their own, do their thing, and just move the ball at ease at times.
So I want to get back to the question Carl had about should Josh be under center more? I think the answer is yes, but it's important to remember that this also is one of those things that has just changed over time where it really is a league-wide thing where teams are lining up more in shotgun now. You even see teams use shotgun on the goal line, which is kind of weird. It's kind of the 2023 wave of the NFL. But I do think that the Bills need to get a little bit more under center in their offense. Are they going to major in it? Probably not. But I think, one, it allows Josh Allen to be more deceptive with his play action. This is not a good play action team. And a lot of time, those play action RPO looks out of shotgun are just not as effective as empty handing a handoff out of under center. And two, I just think it has a chance to keep Josh Allen a little bit more in a rhythm where, hey, this play calls for a 7-step drop throw. And it's just as simple as boom, boom, where it sure felt like last week, Luka, Josh Allen got to the top of his drop out of shotgun. And for whatever reason, felt like he had to bail out of the pocket when there was really no reason to do so. So I like a lot of what the under center offense could provide. I don't think, again, it's going to be something that they do a lot of. I would like to see them incorporate it, though, a little bit more as this season goes on. Thank you so much for the super chat, by the way. We always appreciate that. We should mention Max Crosby. He is one of the best players in the league at edge. And you mentioned Tyree Wilson. I will say, you don't want to have super big fear of a rookie. But one thing we saw Spencer Brown struggle with last week, which was kind of new because Spencer Brown in the past had struggled quite a bit with speed around the edge. He struggled with the bull rush last week. And Spencer Brown being overpowered was not something I had on my bingo card. But Tyree Wilson is a very strong human being, Luka. And even as raw as he is, I think there's a chance that he could win the matchup against Spencer Brown.
I thought about this afterwards because the gut reaction is you saw the Spencer Brown situations, the one where he even gets pushed into Josh Allen's lap. He's false starting because he's probably getting a little bit of trigger happy situations due to him losing his matchup time and time again. I wonder if when I was watching and I went back a little bit, I'm not sitting here comparing his leverage or anything like that, but being beat so easily was not something we expected when it came to kind of physical attributes, just being overwhelmed in the bowl, like you said. And I wonder if he's just not getting low enough due to his concerns with his back. Just something's going on there where he can't trust himself to get fully into the positions he wants to, and he's a little bit too vertical. And obviously, if anyone understands how kind of the trenches work and offensive line versus defensive line play is, leverage wins. You want to be the lowest man. You want to be the most well-grounded individual there. You don't necessarily need to be a short king kind of deal to always win and stuff. You still have to have size overall. But I wonder if just because of his height and how big of a human he is with the back problems he has seemingly had recently, on top of all of that, if he just can't trust himself to get low enough and be reliable enough and he just finds himself too vertical, where then if you are too vertical and someone's just attacking you from the chest, you're going to lose your matchup more than not if they are also a very good, athletic individual themselves, which this is the NFL. Most of your edges and interior defensive linemen are pretty big, strong, athletic guys. I just thought that could potentially be something about it overall, and maybe is just kind of making his play a little bit more of a shock than we expected going into it. I'm hoping that it might be just kind of week one rust and just kind of the situation with Spencer Brown was he did have a little bit of a back concern, and now it's like he's going to get more comfortable. He's going to warm up, and as the year progresses, he does kind of re-win that leverage battle against his guy, so he's not at least being beat up in his chest. But it is just something that I kind of like came to when you kept seeing it on that Monday night game, that I was just wondering, is this really something that Spencer Brown's regressing, or is it more something where maybe he can't trust himself physically enough due to that back, where he's just not winning the point of leverage?
All right, we are going to get to our predictions for this game in a moment. I see you all in chat, and I want to hear your predictions when we start rolling. We'll throw them up on screen when we see them. But Luka, before we do that, I want to give you the two big keys I have for the Bills this week, and I want you to react to both of these. The first one, it's going to sound kind of obvious. Maybe it feels like low-hanging fruit after what happened Monday night. But the keys for me, first key is turnovers. But this is a two-way street, because if you go by PFF stats of turnover worthy plays, Josh Allen is not very good in that metric. 4% of his plays are turnover worthy. Jimmy G is right there with him, 3.5%. So I think, one, we need Josh Allen to rein it in without becoming captain checkdown. We have to find that balance that Josh Allen, we have seen the majority of his career, by the way. He hasn't always been as reckless as 4 turnovers against the Jets would indicate. We have to see the good Josh Allen. The Bills outclassed this Raiders team on both sides of the ball, and turnovers can be the great equalizer. We saw that on Monday. It can't happen from Josh Allen's standpoint. But on the other side, I do think Jimmy G will give this defense a chance to make plays on the ball, particularly if it turns into a shootout and the Raiders have to play keep up and they cannot stick to their running game. And that's where the defenders need to squeeze the ball, need to take advantage, turn the ball over. Don't be afraid to score a defensive touchdown. So, Luka, the most obvious analysis of all time, but it feels like it at least fits the bill this week. Turnovers.
Oh man, don't turn the ball over and you have a higher success rate to win a
Wild
game.
stuff from
That
Josh
is
on
just
Friday
a
night.
crazy, and I love when like you see that in the national kind of analysis and stuff. It's like these guys just got to make sure they don't turn the ball over. It's like, okay, man, like cookie cutter. Like, why don't you just say they need to make sure they have more points on the scoreboard in order to win this game? It's like, yeah, there's a very good way to have success in a game. It's definitely the number one though, just because what we've seen last on the field with Josh Allen and stuff like that. It's just natural that it's like, hey, you would love to see it where it did become a one-off thing. It was a week one thing, whatever you want to call it. It was the hype Monday night thing, whatever you want to chalk it up to. Don't let that bleed into your average Sunday at 1 in Orchard Park. Don't let it just be something where it's like, hey, it wasn't because the spotlight was on you. It wasn't because all of these other things. It's like, no, it's just because for some reason you have the turnover bug or whatever it is. It's like, yes, that's a clear and concise thing. Did you say you had a second point, Josh? I'll kick it right back to you. Yeah,
I do. But I was just thinking, it's so funny you mentioned that, because it's like you're watching the CBS pregame show, right? And they're like, let's go down to Trent Green in New York to talk about this Jets-Dolphins game. And he's like, well, Greg, I think the key to this game is going to be turnovers. Whatever team turns the ball over most is going to probably lose. And it's like, thanks for that insight, Trent. Glad we sent you there 3 days early to get that nugget. Back to you in a bit. It's like, okay, thanks. I learned a lot, and I totally just fell into that trap. Okay, this one maybe also falls into the no duh, but I do have some stats to back it up. When the Bills get down to the red zone this week, Luka, it's got to be touchdowns. This is statistically last season, the Raiders, they were the second worst red zone defense in the entire league. They gave up touchdowns in the red zone on 66% of drives that made it to the red zone. That is absurd. That is a horrific number. This is a Bills team that has struggled at times in the red zone, which is a little bit mind-boggling when you think about the mobility of the quarterback, the unicorn aspect of the quarterback, the weapons they have, and now this running game. This needs to be 7-point games for the Bills, 7-point drives. This cannot be a situation where Tyler Bass is out there carrying fantasy teams. And obviously, we'll get to this in our predictions, but that would also help the Bills pull away. I'm very interested to see if the Bills can have success against the Raiders in the red zone, not just to win this game, but maybe as a sign of things to come that they have buttoned up their red zone issues from a year ago.
What I'll add to this, or I'll piggyback off of this, is my key to game. And it's not necessarily on like the offense to do something. It's kind of just the mindset of the coaching and the team. There was a moment in the Monday night game where Sean McDermott kicked the field goal instead of going for it on a 4th and 2 on the 22. And I feel like a confident team, Bills team in midseason form, whatever you want to call it, goes for that. And it just felt odd to me that all of a sudden it felt like we were watching the 2020 Bills where they weren't comfortable in their skin yet. They just didn't have things going. It was a move that I just questioned, and that was early on. Like that was right out the gate, where like we were still feeling it out. It's the first half. Things are happening. It didn't kind of go awry yet. And I would love to see the Bills in those scoring opportunities or high percentage situations go for that again. Like be the team they used to be. Maybe they respected the Jets defense too much, and because now we're playing the Raiders, they will do that. But I expect them to do that against any team. I trust the Bills against any team, the Niners, the Jets, whoever it is, to pick up 2 yards over kicking a high percentage field goal, because it's way too advantageous to continue a drive at the possibility of picking up 4 more points on that drive. I don't get that. I didn't like or care for that in the moment. I want to see them in this game, and I will piggyback off of your score in the red zone and just be like, hey, just go back to that aggressive manner where it's like, if you're inside the 40 on the opposition side, you better be going for and short situations, 2 yards, 1 yards, whatever it is. You better be doing that, because you should be able to impose your will with the offense you have put together with Josh Allen, with Cook, with Diggs, with everyone that you can put out there. You should be able to pick up 2 yards. So that is my second. I'll say that. I'll piggyback off of your second key to the game, and I will make that my own individual key to the game, Josh. That is the one I want to see. Be more aggressive in the places you should be when it comes to the offensive side of the ball.
T is in the house tonight. Big friend of the show. Also one of our built-in Buffalo friends, compadres. I will tell you all right now, I understand there's a lot of podcasts out there. I get it. But T, her podcast that's on the screen right now, Not Your Average Podcast in the 716, fantastic. Check it out. They do a good job on it. But I'm going to give her a shout out for another one she does that I think is fantastic, called Tea Time with Robin. She hosts it with Robin Mundy, and it's such a different look at the game. It's totally different than anything you'll hear all week. Robin has a great mind for understanding not just the what, but the why. And I highly recommend all of you check it out. Add it to your podcast rotation. I love it. I learn something every time I listen to it. T, we love when you hang out. Question: safety have a club on his hand. I'm not aware of any Bills safety having a club on his hand this week, Luka. Anything? I don't even know of a hand injury. In fact, Mitch Morse was the only one on the report with a finger injury, and he was full go. So not maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but I don't think there's a risk right now of anybody with a club on his hand. Do you know of anything?
I was about to look up the Raiders injury report, because I know they had a pretty extensive injury report, but I can't remember who was even on theirs. So not to my knowledge. Just looking at it here. No, they they had a Trayvon Morig. He had a thumb injury, but he was full participant 2 days. So maybe there's a club in that situation, but I'm not going to bank on it. If he had two, I mean, it's a thumb injury for one. So maybe it would be a situation where I don't know if they'd fully club that, or if they would even, depending on the injury, just kind of wrap it to his hand. But whatever it might be, that would probably be worst case scenario for him.
She's all over it. Raiders.
Yeah. Hey, okay, we found it here. But yeah, I was wondering about that, because I knew they had a pretty extensive list there. And so overall, yeah, Morig looks like he's going to be a full go. He's not even listed as like a game status questionable. He might have a club depending on what that thumb injury is. But overall, I'm not aware what they're going to do. I'm not a medical individual, so I'm not going to claim to be knowing what is going on there.
Luka, you've done enough shows with me to know when I start smirking that something uncomfortable is coming. But if Morig has a club on his hand, he gets mashed up on Gabe Davis or Trent Sherfield with as well as they run block. Do you think they're going to throw him out the club?
Oh my God. I'm not
everybody.
Not,
You're welcome.
I'm not answering.
Bills analysis and cheesy jokes. You're all welcome for that. Let's get into predictions on this game, Luka. That's why the people are here. Let us know in the chat what you think the score prediction is going to be. We already saw a couple of them come in. We have 31-24. I assume that's a win for the Bills. We have Izzy coming in with 38-17. And then big time friend of the show, Charlene, coming in with Bills 24-17. I like where your head's at, Charlene. DF forever with a super chat. We appreciate that. Got to go. Hey, thanks for hanging out tonight. Always appreciate you stopping by. And then friend of the show, Roy Collins with 2017 in overtime. Roy, love you, dude. You are one of the most loyal watchers we have in these parts. But if they go to overtime with these Raiders again, Roy amended it. Okay, I was gonna say that's very un-Roy like. I need 30-13, much better. All right, Luka, I'm gonna let you go first. Let me know how you see this game playing out.
So in our prediction show, I pulled up that note so I understood what I said, but I thought I remembered it correctly. I was kind of in a similar mind space with what it seems like Izzy is at, and that was in a 38-13 win for the Bills. What I will say is I might come down on the points scored for the Bills in this situation. To me, the defense is fine. The Bills are fine defensively. And in this game, if they do the things they need to, and everyone looks exactly how they did against the Jets here against the Raiders, I expect them to hold the Raiders to 13 points. What I will say is this. I mentioned earlier in the show that Josh Allen, coming off of pretty bad losses, does not necessarily blow the doors off of the next team. There is a stat out there, I believe, and you can make a stat for basically everything, but there's a stat out there that he has a career passer rating that is very, very good in his career. But the passer rating doesn't tell the whole story. And if you look at his actual individual stats and like yards and stuff of that nature, it's not like he blows the doors off. And I think this is going to be a situation where I do wonder, the line being 8.5 and stuff like that, if they'll be able to cover that 8.5. I question that. I'm not sitting here and saying that it's going to be a 21-13 game. I think in the end they will cover, but it might be a situation in betting terms where you're sweating that cover of an 8.5 spread. And overall, I expect the Bills to win this game 27-13. That's kind of where my head's at with this game.
So that you do have them covering.
Yeah.
And you have the Bills winning.
Yep.
Last week, you went 0 for 2. You had the Bills winning and covering, and the Bills lost. I had the Bills winning, but not covering. So I actually got one right, but I don't even want credit for it because it was so depressing. But here's how I see this game going. And you're right. That 8.5 point spread is pretty big. I think there's a feeling among Bills fans and Bills Mafia that the Bills are going to explode on offense. And I do share that. I think there will be points in this game where it looks relatively easy for the offense. This is a defense they should be able to have their way with. But there's a couple of factors in play here that make me at least a little nervous. One, offensively for the Raiders, I do think when they come out in heavy personnel or even 21 personnel against the Bills, if the Bills stay in their nickel, the Bills could have a tough time getting off the field. I'm not saying the Raiders are going to go down there and get a touchdown, but I think the Raiders could go on some 5, 6, 7-minute drives that maybe ultimately wind up with a field goal. That will shorten the game. The other thing that I wonder about is all week long, Josh Allen has looked at those turnovers, particularly those 2 Hail Mary balls into double coverage, and he's been beating into his head, take the profit, take the check down, play within the scope of the offense. We already talked about the fact that last year the Raiders were the 7th lowest defensive ADOT team. They want to keep it in front of you on defense and force you to dink and dunk them down the field. And you factor in that maybe the Jets have given the rest of the league a blueprint on the Bills, and that's what teams will do, is force you to dink and dunk them. I think we could see the Bills particularly go on some long drives themselves if we get the good Josh Allen that is making the right reads, making the smart reads, plus you mix in some James Cook runs. So I do think the Bills will get their points. I think it'll be an overall pretty comfortable win for the Bills, but I don't think I want to come on here and say the Bills are going to win 44-24. I don't know that they'll have the opportunity to score 44 points. I'm going to say the Bills win this game 34-24. And I do think that they will cover the spread, but I think it's going to be even more comfortable than that. I think it could be like a late score by the Raiders that makes it a little bit closer. I don't think this is a game that maybe after the first quarter is really too much in doubt. I think the Bills should outclass this team on both sides of the ball. There's going to be a lot of momentum in that stadium for the home opener. And this is an angry Bills team that really just wants to get back out there and take out some frustration on this Raiders team. Before we get into the thing I'm really excited about, Luka, I asked you this last week, and I want to ask you now. Is this a must win?
I'm going to answer this in 2 parts. Literally, in the landscape of a season in the NFL, No, it is not. It is week 2. We saw the Bengals, and I love just pulling it up because it's obviously recent and stuff of that nature. The Bengals lost week 1 last year at home to the Steelers, then went to Dallas and lost to Cooper Rush and the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas. They then obviously rattled off, I believe, what was it? 12 wins in their next 14, 15 games, whatever the math is. I'm not doing math right now in my head. But overall, it's not exactly a must-win game. What I will say, though, is when it comes to confidence, when it comes to trying to get back up on the horse that they got kicked off of last week, you need to win this game. I don't care if they cover the 8.5. I don't care if they blow them out and stuff. You don't need to do that. It can be the ugliest win possible. Allen can throw another 3 interceptions. I don't want to see that happen, and I would love for him not to do so. But if, as long as you get the win in the column, that's all that matters to get you back up on the horse. And then you just chip away at getting that confidence back. You chip away at just getting back as the team you are, so that once you get to those more difficult games later on, you can actually be in a rhythm, be confident, do the things you want to do against the Bengals, against the Chiefs, and so on and so forth, to hopefully propel yourself back up the standings and do what you need to do to win your division once again and get into the playoffs with some good juju going on.
I'm going to align with Cecilia on this one. She said that the must win will be 0-2.
Over
I understand everything you're saying. It is week 2. Like, no season has ever ended in the history of sports at week 2. And we have Josh Allen. We have a talented team. 0-2 is not a death nail. But here's the problem. In the history of the NFL, only 10% of teams that start 0-2 make the playoffs. You don't want to have to fight to be an outlier. The second thing is, we all know how this schedule shakes out. The early games are in the beginning. In the back half of the schedule, we have at Philadelphia, at Cincinnati, at Arrowhead. We have the Dallas Cowboys. We go to Los Angeles. I'm saying we, like I'm going to be on the field. We play. We did it again. The Los Angeles Chargers pop up. There's another matchup with the Jets. They finished the season in Miami. I'm just going to say we're going to be okay with it. You never know. There could be a matchup. Aaron Rodgers won't be back, but the Jets gave the Bills fits. The tough games are on the back end. This is the portion of the season where the Bills are supposed to be building a buffer for potentially slipping up in the second half. Now, I don't think anybody thought the Jets game was going to be easy, but after 4 plays, it sure looked like it should have been. And then I think when you look at the Raiders coming to town in Buffalo for the home opener, boy, if you don't win this game, it's going to be fascinating to watch everything unfold with some of the drama around this team and seeing what's going on there. We have one more question here, Luka, before we are going to get to our new segment. It was from Carl, and I will get to that, and then we'll go into our next segment. Carl wants to know, will Harris or Murray get more touches, or will it continue to be the James Cook show in the running game? Carl, my expectation is it's going to be the James Cook show. We saw that a lot last week. I will say one caveat on the money drive, the last drive of the game where the Bills had to have a field goal. I thought it was fascinating that Latavius Murray came into the game as an extra pass protector. Now, that maybe was the Bills showing their hand that they feel like he's the best pass protector in that situation. So that's something to keep an eye on. But in general, I still think it's going to be the James Cook show. If you have him in fantasy, I think you're going to be pretty happy with that. Or at least you could bet on it. I only said that because I want to transition here. Speaking of betting, it is time for the segment that we know Luka's looking forward to. It is the segment where Luka is going to make you all rich. He promises that all of his picks will come through, and these are guaranteed. If you lose money, Luka will fully refund you. None of that is true.
Jeez.
It was a tough week for Luka's locks last week. You believed in the Giants. They did not believe in themselves. Yeah, that was bad. That was bad. It was week 1 for the Giants, and boy, did it show. You were wrong about Minnesota, but that they look also a team looked like they laid an egg.
I fell into the trap. I fell into the dang trap. You don't fall into that dang trap.
But the game you hit was
Packers money line over the Bears. Never sweat that one.
No,
that one. I should have made that my two. I was very, very confident in that one. I should have flopped that with the Giants, because Giants, I 2U'd it because all the numbers, everything told you to do that. Whereas the Packers was more of just me not trusting the Bears. So it's not necessarily that the numbers were backing me up on that. Whereas it was just a gut feeling that it's like, how can I trust the Bears? But overall, I should have made that my 2U play. And that's the only reason we're at a negative unit scale right now with that 1-2 record. But yeah, is what it is.
All right. Well, the first game you have here is a fascinating game. I wish it wasn't being played at the same time as the Bills game because I would love to just dial in and watch this game. It will be on ATV in my house, but not the primary one because that's where the Bills are at. It is an AFC North matchup, and it is a real opportunity for the Ravens as they travel to Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. The Bengals, like the Bills, had a very disappointing week one result. They only scored 3 points. Joe Burrow looked awful. I think he had something like 83 yards. There was really bad weather. The Ravens come into this game as 3-point underdogs, Luka. But man, if they could find a way to win this game and knock the Bengals to 0-2 while also getting to 2-0 themselves, not knowing what Cleveland's going to do, that would make things fascinating for what's going on with the Bengals. How do you see this one in your week two locks?
Yeah, so this is a game I feel kind of I don't actually feel bad for the Bengals. I just find it weird that they constantly like they now have two divisional matchups right out the gate. And that to me that it seems extremely odd. Them and Cleveland. The state of Ohio in professional football has to get two divisional games right out of the way. That kind of sucks for them. I feel like early on you don't necessarily want to play too many divisional games because you're potentially still getting in a rhythm, stuff like that. But anyways, they're now at home. I believe, if I recall correctly, one, the weather is not going to be great. That is something of note, of course, because there's one team I trust a little bit more in not great weather than the other. I think overall, the Bengals should be a very, very good team, and weather shouldn't necessarily affect them. But the Ravens just have a game that is built to be sloppy. It's a game, an offense that is built to do everything they need to, where they need to even attack the air. And this is kind of my overwhelming reason on why I'm going this way. They showed that Zay Flowers, my draft love of this past draft, is unbelievable. They have a plan for him, and he absolutely excelled in the way. I think the only thing that got in the Ravens' way last week, other than turnovers themselves, was the fact that they just weren't comfortable enough to throw it enough. Like every time they went into a spread offense, it was beautiful. They had Zay Flowers on these, quick in screens and stuff like that that were just explosive left and right. And then they still have that ground game with Lamar and whoever's in the backfield. It doesn't really matter if it's J.K. Dobbins, which very unfortunate situation for him, but it could be Gus Edwards. It can be Justice Hill. It's going to be someone who they eventually, find off the street. This is a game that overall a lot of money also is on the Bengals. A lot of
Mhm.
things are happening for the Bengals where I just don't understand it necessarily overall in a divisional game that I expect to be the under. And that's why I'm going with the Ravens +3. I think you can get them at a very good line right now. I mean, obviously you can see it. It's essentially even money on a couple of the more popular sports books. I believe a lot of individuals think the Bengals will bounce back, but even last year I mentioned it against a Cooper Rush led Dallas team, they were still not impressive. I don't know if Joe Burrow's 100% as well in a bad weather game where he didn't play in the preseason once again. I just trust the Ravens on the road to make things happen and overall cover that spread of 3 points. I will take the field goal in a divisional battle like this one. Yeah, give me the Ravens.
So it's fascinating because when I look at this matchup, it screams to me Bengals. And I'm the public. I don't dive into this. I look at it through my NFL lens, not so much like point spread and historical lens. That's what you're here for. You're much more in tune with that stuff. But I'm like, okay, so the Bengals are only a 3-point dog or favorite at home, and they did lose last week, which I think sets up a little bit of desperation play on their part. And then Costa mentioned it in chat. They are dealing with a laundry list of injuries. You mentioned they already lost J.K. Dobbins, but they're going to be down cornerback Marlon Humphrey, center Tyler Lindenbaum, left tackle Ronnie Stanley, and safety Marcus Williams. So two members of their secondary. I look at that and I'm like, man, I'm not even getting a hook with the Bengals. Give me the Bengals all day long. But that's what a lot of times, if it looks too good to be true, there's probably a reason, right?
Yeah, essentially, it's a lot of things for the public are pointing to the Bengals, and I can fully understand that. It's
Mm-hmm.
just when you factor in weather, you factor in an individual like Joe Burrow dealing with an injury and stuff like that, where he might still not be at 100% with that calf issue or whatever. Is it calf or hamstring? Leg injury, we'll call it for now. All of those things going well. The Ravens do play them well for the most part. There were situations, of course, where the Bengals blew them out a couple of years ago, but they also were decimated by injuries in the secondary and whatnot. I just think a lot of things are working the Ravens' way to at least cover that 3 points. There is one sports book, for what it's worth. If you use BetMGM, you can still get them at plus 3.5. If you can actually get that hook to cover, that would be awesome. So, but most of the books right now, I think it's PointsBet and MGM right now are the only ones at 3.5. And then all your other ones like FanDuel, DraftKings are 3 even. I would still take that at essentially even money. That's just what makes sense to me.
Another division game has caught your eye this week, an AFC South battle as the 0-1 Indianapolis Colts travel to Houston to take on the Houston Texans. It's a battle of rookie quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson versus CJ Stroud. Both of these teams lost last week. Both hung tough for a while, but ultimately the Jaguars in the Colts case and the Ravens in the Texans case pulled away. The Texans are favored in an NFL game, which I'm not sure the last time I've said that, Luka. They're favored by 1 point. How do you see this battle going?
So this is one of the funniest lines throughout the week. You mentioned that the Texans are favorited. Josh, this has flipped the entire week. I don't even remember what it actually opened at, but I know it's been a point, and it just keeps going back and forth between Indianapolis and Houston. And what I will say is this: as you mentioned last week, both the Texans and the Colts held into their game strong against strong opposition. Colts were playing against the Jags at home. The Texans were playing at the Ravens. And overall, I thought they were two different games, though, in the reasons of why they were holding strong in these games. The Colts were more opportunistic. I thought Anthony Richardson looked raw, but decent in his role in that offense. And then on top of it, you had the Texans who kind of were being held into it by Lamar and by mistakes by that offense and stuff like that, where then eventually they just figured it out later on, stuff like that, and the Ravens pulled away. So to me, the team that is just better suited for this matchup, which is going to be an ugly one, is probably the dog. But if you're only getting a point, obviously spread to me is whatever. And I just trust, I absolutely trust. Hold on. The Colts in this situation way more than I do the Texans. And therefore, with everything I've seen on top of that, I will absolutely take the Colts at plus or minus money, basically even money, to win this game in Houston, because the bottom line is I think that they had a plan in a situation for that, for their rookie quarterback, for that defense, everything in their actual roster to come out with a win in a game where it's kind of a coin toss, and we've seen it with the line. Just give me the Colts. Geez, I almost said the Texans. Whew. Give me the Colts in this situation on the road in Houston, because overall, I trust Anthony Richardson. I trust the Colts defense over the Versa when it comes to CJ Stroud and then the Texans defense. I'm not saying that the Texans are god awful. I think it's actually a close matchup and it makes sense, but I just trust the Colts more. I like the Colts in this situation. Getting them at plus money, especially on FanDuel, give it to me. That's why I have it as a lock.
Will this game make one of your 5 TVs?
For betting purposes, it probably will. I haven't quite broken down the 1:00 slate yet.
Okay.
I don't remember what it is. I know it's not a pretty one, if I recall. I remember in our Discord that we kind of share in, there was a discussion with us and a mutual Costa where it was not a pretty 1:00 slate whatsoever. I think you have like games like Chargers at Titans and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It might be a game that I squeak onto that vertical monitor of mine. I squeak it in the corner because I'm going to be wanting to keep tabs on it, because I'm imagining Colts money line, I'm going to be sweating it to the very end. I do not expect an easy game. I do not expect them to blow them out. So it's going to be one that I'm going to want to keep my eye on at all times.
Interesting matchup taking place in Detroit this week, as the Lions, who have been waiting since last Thursday to take the field after their huge upset over the Chiefs on opening night, are a 5.5 point favorite over the Seattle Seahawks. And I look at this line, Luka, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, one, is it an overreaction to one game? Both the Seahawks playing lousy against the Rams and the Lions obviously shocking the world and beating the Chiefs. When these two teams played last year in Detroit, the Seahawks actually went in there and got a big win. So I think this game has a chance to be a little bit of a trap. How do you see this one playing out?
So I love where your head's at, first and foremost. If I were to be betting this line, wink, wink, I would love the Seahawks in this situation. I feel like it's a classic thing where you had the Lions go into Arrowhead, win a game by a point. Then you had the Seahawks, who looked awful. I think they had 13 total yards in the third quarter, maybe the second half. I don't remember. I know it was either third or fourth quarter or the second half entirely, but they had 13 yards. It was awful. And they just didn't impress anyone, of course. They kind of look like, oh, it was a Geno 1 year situation. So the line really moved, of course, in the favor of the Lions. And I will say this, you would expect a lot more public money on the Lions. It's not actually the case. The public seems to like Seattle. And that's the only thing that kind of scares me, is because logic tells me, okay, buy low on the Seahawks. You're getting 5.5. It could be a shootout, yes, but I would like Seattle's offense to be able to keep up with the Lions. It's not like their one is overwhelming to the other. But the reason I just brought that up is the lock of my game is the over. 47.5 to me is way too low of a number in this game. I believe that you could be at 48 points and more by the start of the fourth quarter in this game. I thought I thought this line would move a lot more throughout the week. It really didn't. There's money, to put it this way, there's NFL green lines out there that you look at. And basically what it does is it evaluates cash and tickets on certain bets and will tell you, based on historical data on top of that, where there is value based on all of the bets, cash, all of that situation. 65% of the cash right now is on the over 47.5, and it is still telling you there is actual value in the over. That to me is kind of that highlighter situation. By the way, that is also the situation for the Bills game, for the record. So your score prediction was a great one. There is value in over 47 even right now. But the over 47.5 and Seahawks Lions is just too good to be true, in my opinion. I'm still going to sucker myself into it. I'm going to make it my 2U play. I just love it way too much to not bet it whatsoever.
All right. So you have, for your locks of the week, you have the Ravens +3 against the Bengals. That says Chargers, but it's the Bengals.
Oh, geez, my bad.
The Colts money line against the Texans. And then you have your 2-unit bet. The Seahawks Lions hit the over at 47.5. Good luck to all of you in your bets this weekend. For Luka, this is Josh. That has been this week's edition of Luka's Locks. All right, guys, I want to ask Luka to do something that he did really for me off air last week, but I thought it was interesting. Last week before the Bills Jets game, we were talking and you were like, well, this is what the green line is telling me about the Bills and Jets. And this is how I read into it. And I find this interesting. What have you been able to learn about the Bills Raiders game, where maybe the sharps are at, where the public money's at, what the green line is? What does that movement tell you about what this game is at least looking like the experts are thinking?
The public loves the Bills. The Vegas and the public loves the Bills. I mean, money is going in like crazy right now. I couldn't believe this when I saw this. I feel like this is not pulling all data, but right now the green line on PFF has actually the Bills at 95% cash at -8.5.
Ooh, I don't
That
like
is
that.
concerning. That is not a good thing. You don't want that. It tells you value is, of course, on Vegas, both money line and the spread. To me, what that is there are individuals that believe the Raiders not only can cover 8.5, but they actually have value in maybe taking this game in week 2 based on what they saw last week, based on historical data, of course. The Raiders, I believe, actually historically have a pretty good record in Buffalo. Take that for what it is. Obviously, history is history. It is not the current. But with that in mind, it likes it being an over game as well. So it's just like one of those situations where if you like a severe dog and you like the value in that, you would think it would be an under game, but it just doesn't feel that way because the defense, especially for the Raiders, is just not good enough. So overall, if you're going to bet that game, please, for the love of God, do not bet aside. I think 8.5 is way too many points in an NFL game, especially early on in the season. Like, this is not a situation where you have Bills Texans week 14 and the Texans really have nothing to play for, or whatever the situation may be, where you'll find yourself in a 11-point spread game. And it's like, no, the Bills will absolutely dog walk the Texans late in the season because one team needs the win. The other one doesn't really care. It's just guys on the field trying to play for their jobs. So overall, the Bills would overcome. It's like, no, this is early on. The Raiders are still in this and they believe they still have something to say when it comes to this season. So 8.5 points is way too much. There's a lot of public money on the Bills, and overall, the value is being seen. The sharps are seeing that, and they're probably looking at that and saying, Raiders, you could by kickoff maybe get this line up to 9, maybe 9.5. And at that point in time, you probably have to take the Raiders just on, precedent at that point.
And it's so wild to think about how big of a spread 8.5 really is, because the Bills could be up 37-20 with 10 seconds left, and the Raiders could still cover. Well, wait a minute.
Nope, you
17.
didn't do your
Nope.
math right.
37-22
There you
with
go.
10 seconds left. The backdoor cover is what can burn you every time.
Yep.
Is this game would obviously be something maybe you would want to tease. Are you a fan of teasers overall?
Oh yeah. I did an entire 1 and 4 o'clock slate teaser last week where I did 7.5 points. And who was it? Oh, Carolina screwed me over.
Hmm.
I had Carolina. I did a 7.5 point teaser where I had Carolina all the way up to 11. I think it was in that situation, and they couldn't even cover that against the Falcons. Unbelievable, man! Like how do you not cover 11 points in a divisional game against the Falcons? Desmond Ritter led Falcons. Frank Reich is really getting on my wrong side right
Yeah,
now. I'm going to
he's
tell you that. It
yeah.
is. I am not happy with what's going on there. So I do love teasers though. Teasers are a really fun way, especially if you're picking, let's say you're an individual that wants to pick the entire slate. You don't have to necessarily parlay it with the lines you're given. You take the sides you like and then all of a sudden mess with the lines a little bit in your teaser situation where all of a sudden I had the Ravens -1 against the Texans. It's like the Ravens should absolutely cover 1 point against the Texans. I had 49ers plus 5.5 or whatever it turned out to be at that point. Like it makes it a lot more interesting where if all of a sudden your team loses by a field goal and they were a 2.5 point favorite, depending on how long of a teaser thick card you wanted for a lotto ticket. Yes, if technically you get them all right and it would be like 100K, if you tease at 7.5 points, that same bet could still probably win you a few hundred. And at least you teased it in a way that's putting that in your pocket rather than a long shot like that lotto ticket.
Carl brings up a good point. This Chiefs Jaguars game could be a lot of fun. Go
Oh, yeah.
Jags, 100%. Like let's try to put as much dirt on the Chiefs as possible. I think the Chiefs are going to dog walk the Jags. I really do. I think getting Travis Kelce back, getting Chris Jones back is a good thing. I think the Jaguars are talented, but I would not want to play the Chiefs on a mini bye after a loss. That does not sound like a lot of fun for Andy Reid, who I think taught Doug Peterson a lot about football, but not everything Andy Reid knows. We shall see. That'll be a fun game. All right, Luka, last question for you. What is catching your eye in college football this week? For
Ooh,
me, it is very, very simple. I love everything about this game. Colorado State. I love the fact that it's at 10 p.m. my time, which that can't be right. 10 p.m. my time?
yep.
Holy moly.
It's a late
That
game.
works out so perfect as somebody that has 2 kids in the house. I I think I've told you this already. Like, I'm not gonna say I'm a Colorado Buffaloes fan. That's not true at all. But the Dion story has me. As somebody that has never really had a college football team, this works for me on so many levels that I find myself following the Colorado Buffaloes. And then the coach from Colorado State calling out Dion for wearing a hat and sunglasses this week.
So
Oh,
dumb.
they are going to get absolutely smashed. And I look forward to that. I am so happy with what's going on in Colorado. And I am a big Deion Sanders fan. What has your eye this weekend? Because at first look for me, there didn't seem like any really marquee matchups.
Yeah, this is a tough week. I will say that when it comes to college football. So like the weeks 1 and 2 or week 0, even, so 1, 2, and 3, because college football does a week 0, because why not? You'll always have 1 or 2 matchups where they design for television or essentially for ratings and stuff like that. They're fun matchups. They're matchups you don't get because they're not interconference, or maybe in a situation of like Texas Bama, it's about to be, and it's be a budding rivalry that might be on its works, especially after the result that happened in that game. Still can't believe it. But overall, now you're starting to see like Miami yesterday played Bethune-Cookman. I don't know exactly who that is, but of course you got to get those in because Miami played some notable game earlier on in the season. So you're starting to get those kind of trickle in. You do have other games, Penn State at Illinois. That is obviously a Big Ten game. Penn State should be able to take care of business in that situation. A couple games that kind of catch my eye though, when it comes to this slate, I do. There's a couple things. I want to see the continuation of dominance with Notre Dame. I want to see that team finally excel and do something, because it seems like they have a quarterback that is not shy of the moment, isn't overwhelmed by the school of which he plays for. It seems like a team that has a lot of good things going for them early on. They haven't played any crazy tough kind of opposition. NC State has a good defense, but I mean, they overtook that with ease. It didn't look pretty early on before they had a massive weather delay, but after the weather delay, they just pop off a big run and it was over after that point. Stuff like that. But I mean, a lot of people I've been hearing about on CBS, actually, you'll have Georgia, South Carolina. I'm not impressed with South Carolina. Spencer Rattler is not a quarterback that thrills me with South Carolina. I expect Georgia, who actually hasn't been that impressive. I think I don't know if they got a sack last week, but I believe they're still without a sack somehow, which is just a mind-blowing stat when you think about just how impressive the Georgia defense is every year. That's one game that notes me. Oregon State, though, that's a team to really highlight, look out for. They have a top recruit from Clemson. I'm not going to say his last name. He's a Hawaiian quarterback that is, it's like Ugalalea or whatever. I apologize to him for not saying his name right, but he seems to be finding his own out there up in Oregon. But yeah, it's kind of one of those college football weeks that it's nothing really impressive overall. The Colorado game, it's actually 9:00 your time. It's 10:00 Eastern, Josh. So it's gonna be 9:00 kickoff for you.
That's good. That's better.
But yeah, I mean, overall, there's a lot of fun betting games. Love me some Ohio Bobcats this week. They're plus 3.5. Oh my goodness. They get their quarterback back, the reigning MAC offensive player of the year. Just if you want a college football bet that I love, Ohio Bobcats plus 3.5. Absolutely. Take it to the window, even sprinkle the money line. They can absolutely win that game. But yeah, it's one of those ones you got to ride through, because then next week is really when conference play starts. And that's when you'll start seeing like the fun SEC matchups, the fun Big 12 matchups, the fun Big 10 matchups. And then you really get rolling into the heart of the college football season.
It's so funny because growing up, Tennessee, Florida was must-see TV. It was like appointment television, and now it's this week, and it's like, who cares? Like, Tennessee's going to just go there in Florida, by the way. I like where your head was at with Penn State at Illinois, like taking the road team there. As far as like, hey, that could be interesting. They're in Illinois, but Penn State's probably going to win. But it is just funny that like Florida doesn't even get a sniff of that could be interesting. All right, well, Luka, next time you and I are doing a show together, we will be recording it Sunday night, releasing it Monday morning, our Bills Chat podcast. It will be a post-game show for these Buffalo Bills. Hopefully the Bills are 1-0 or 1-1 at that point in time with a big victory over these Las Vegas Raiders. Coming up on Sunday, I will be doing the Built-in Buffalo halftime show. I go live for about 10 minutes, break down everything that happened in the first half. We had a good crowd turnout last week. People were obviously pretty excited about what had happened, and then it obviously took a turn for the worse. Quick little 10-minute halftime show, talk about what's working, what's not working, what needs to happen in the second half. And then for our Bills Chat YouTube channel, I will do a quick 10-minute recap of the game as soon as it ends, but that will really just be to lead you into Bills Chat podcast that'll release Monday morning, where Luka and I will do a much thorough breakdown, bring back our game balls and game checks segment, which we all look forward to. And then we'll be into our new week. I'll be releasing a new Madden 24 franchise video on Tuesday. And then Luka will have Sabres chat on Thursday. Stokes and I'll be back with quick chat on Wednesday as we start to turn our attention then toward the Washington Commanders. We'll talk about everything that Sean McDermott said. And then Luka, I will be gone because Stokes is getting married. And I'm going to his wedding, which means that not only is your co-host gone, but your primary backup is gone, which puts you in a very fascinating spot that, quite honestly, folks, peek behind the curtain, we still aren't sure what we're doing just yet. But there's a chance there may not be a Bills Chat live next week. We shall see. We will certainly communicate that with you on Bills Chat Pod on Twitter and all the Built-in Buffalo social media. Luka, any final thoughts? Anything you want to say about Sabres chat? Anything you want to say about Bills Raiders? The floor is yours for about, 15 seconds.
15 seconds. Geez, what the heck? No, I mean, I recently put out a Sabres chat thing. There was actually, while we were watching, there was a Sabres prospect challenge start. They were playing against the Canadiens. I unfortunately was not able to watch too much of it because we had to get live on air ourselves. But I put out a thing where I talked about the prospects, the individuals I'm going to look into. I'm, of course, going to watch the live stream that they had on YouTube. If you are not aware, the Sabres are broadcasting that prospect challenge on their YouTube. Be sure to watch it. They're playing again tomorrow at 7 and then Monday at 5. I believe tomorrow is against the Penguins prospects and then Monday is against the Devils. I might have flipped those. Can't remember. But overall, I appreciate you guys listening to the Sabres Chat podcast as well that I put out Thursdays at noon. Really, we're going to get back in the swing of things because we're in the heart of sports time now. We're getting to the fall. I mean, Josh, I walk outside right now and it smells crisp. It smells like fall, and it is fantastic. I'm so happy that time is here. I mean, I know fall's here because tomorrow I'm going to have to go apple picking. It seems a little bit early for that, but we're doing it. But overall, it'll be fun. It'll be a fun way to enjoy the Saturday. And do our thing. But yeah, overall, we're in the sports time, Josh. We're doing things. We got a ton of weekly content now that we're going to be doing for the next 4+ months of our lives.
You are definitely a married man. You're going apple picking on Saturday, but you got to do what you got to do to make sure that Sunday is wide open. So I respect it. Plus, you can get some really nice apples. I'm a big apple guy, and there is nothing more disappointed than when you come back from the grocery store with what looks like a good batch of apples, and then you bite into it and it's mushy and there's just no resistance there. And it's like, oh my God, because a good apple is about as good as it gets for me as a snack. All right. Enough about that. Enough about this show. For Luka, there it is. Got the point right. We're back in midseason form. I am Josh McCarty, and we will see you next time on Bills Chat Live.